Relationships shape our brains, a feminine perspective on attachment and parenting styles. Okay, so now let's take a look at some of the complicating factors if we really want to understand personality development. And so, given that most of us have two parents and each of them have their own parenting style, we develop a unique relationship or bond with each parent. And so, we have two attachment styles, a primary or core and a secondary. And then, given that most parents have more than one child, and they tend to have a unique parenting style with each child. And so we need to account for the birth order effect. So, like one typical scenario is that a parent with their firstborn, they can be quite doting and affectionate and spend a lot of time with them, shower them with attention and affection. And then with the second-born, they can be quite harsh and authoritarian and punishing and criticizing and ridiculing. That's the same parent but with different children. So there's a lot more to birth order, and I'll do a whole nother video on that. And then there's siblings, so the lower down you are in the birth order, the more your personality is influenced by the older siblings. And that influence can be supportive. You can have a loving, caring, affectionate older brother or sister, or they can be harsh and critical, or they can bully you. They can even be abusive. And so the personality development of the lower down in the order sibling is sometimes even more influenced by the older siblings than by the parents even. And some kids spend a lot of time with their grandparents. Sometimes both parents are working, so in the afternoons the child will spend a few hours with granny and grandpa. And so they also have a significant influence over the child. And in many cases, there's a nanny or a helper who's looking after the kid for half the day or most of the day. And then there's teachers and peers. So especially at the primary school level, a kid will spend a few hours at school with the same teacher, the same one teacher for the whole year. And so this is a really significant influence. And so this teacher, remember, the teacher can also have unique attachment styles, and they tend to be supportive, but teachers can also be harsh and critical. They can also be permissive. They can also even be abusive and neglecting. It all depends on the school or yeah. So it's more about time and influence, and not specifically about mother and father and parents, but who you spend the most time with and who has the most influence over you. And then genes and temperaments are also significant. We've discovered that nature and nurture in equal measure have an influence on us. So we inherit certain tendencies and potentialities, but how those manifest depends on nurture. So it's really the relationships that shape our brains, that shape our personalities and faculties. Culture and learning also becomes a big influence as we watch TV and read books. We absorb the culture, we watch movies, we listen to music, and it also becomes a significant influence on our personality. Traumatic experiences later in life can also impact us, but research has found that kids who are secure are more resilient, they cope better, and they bounce back quicker than kids who are insecure, whether that's avoidant, resistant, or disturbed. And yeah. So let's look at some possible parent combinations. There are many combos, and it's true that opposites attract, but it's also true that birds of a feather flock together. You find that two secure people get together, but you also find that okay, let's look at it. So You may have an authoritative or supportive mother. You may have an authoritarian or harsh father. You may have the permissive mother or the abusive, uninvolved father. So let's take a look at this one scenario where the harsh authoritarian father hooks up with a permissive mother. And this often does happen because like dominant and submissive people tend to lock into each other in relationship. And so what will their kid look like? So keeping in mind time and influence, that in a typical day, let's say a kid sleeps for 8 hours and travels and eats and does other things for 2 hours. So out of a total of the 14 remaining hours, the child spends 4 of them at home with mom and dad. And remember, we're talking about the harsh authoritarian father and the permissive mother. That's 30% of their time. And then they're at school with their teacher, who's a nice supportive teacher, and that's another 30%. Then they spend 2 hours with granny or nanny, who's, let's say in this case, uninvolved. So they're just minding the child and not really interacting with them much. And then they spend 2 hours playing with kids and siblings at school or at home or wherever. And then they have 2 hours to themselves watching TV or YouTube or reading. So now, given that mixed bag, let's look at what would be the possible core and secondary attachment styles. So the harsh authoritarian father tends to be a dominating figure. So even though the mother is permissive, we're going to say the core attachment style is an avoidant one, and the secondary is a resistant one because the mother is permissive and she allows. But with a different mother, you could have a supportive mother, and so there'll be a secondary secure or secondary disturbed. So there are all these different permutations. So if the permissive mother was more of the main caregiver, then the core attachment style would be resistant, and the secondary would be avoidant with the harsh, critical father. But again, there are other combinations. So, in the case of birds of a feather flock together, you find that two supportive parents hook up and have a doubly secure child, and it's wonderful, you know. The child will be super secure. But you can also have the case where two of these harsh, critical kind of people get together, and that relationship doesn't last long because they're always at loggerheads. But this will be a doubly avoidant child, very fearful and anxious. And then two permissive parents, this does happen quite a lot. And so the child becomes doubly resistant and very spoiled, like a spoiled brat. And then the worst possible combination is two abusive, neglecting parents. And this child is doubly disturbed and has very little other resources to go on, and the personality structure is completely fragmented and chaotic and dissociative. So very quickly, let's just look at how attachment styles become personality styles. And so the above two, because the parents are more responsive, so these kids are more extroverted and they are energized from socializing with other people. But the below two, because the parents are not so responsive, there's little attention and affection, they tend to be introverted because interacting with others is taxing and stressful and anxiety provoking, so they prefer to be on their own. And then the upper two tend to be more dominant, but the secure child has more of a stable and unconditional dominance. The resistant child is more feels superior and can be aggressive and bullying and kind of conditional self-esteem. The lower two tend to be more submissive because they're fearful, so they go along with things. They don't confront and they don't assert themselves. So, personality traits associated with these relationship styles or personality styles. So, the secure child is more calm and open and conscientious, ambivert, a mix or balance between extrovert and introvert, and more agreeable. The resistant child tends to be neurotic, meticulous. They're perfectionists because their parents want them to be perfect and high achieving, and they're extrovert, as I said, and they can be quite manipulative. They know how to use their emotions to get people to do what they want. The authoritarian, the avoidant child tends to be also neurotic. They tend to be apathetic, or they have low motivation to do things. They, like I said, they tend to be introvert, and they are gullible, which means that because their ability to listen to tone of voice and perceive body language and hand gestures, and that they can't read people very well. They listen to the words, and so they can't tell when they're being manipulated or lied to or cheated. And then the disturbed child has psychotic features to their personality. They're very closed and within themselves. They can be really rebellious and disagreeable and argumentative. So what kind of psychopathology develops? What kind of personality disorders are we looking at? So none for the secure child. The avoidant child has avoidant personality disorder later in life, various social anxieties and anxiety disorders. The resistant or spoiled child can develop borderline, narcissistic, or histrionic personality disorders. Borderline is more associated with abuse, and especially sexual abuse and incest during childhood. And so it's not just the resistant attachment style, but it's the resistant style which gives it its particular flavor, and the rage and aggression and the violence that's associated with that pattern, and the self-harming. And narcissist is a classic spoiled brat, grown-up spoiled brat, and so they feel superior. They always need to be the center of attention, and they use emotions to manipulate people. Okay, so the disturbed child grows up to have dissociative identity disorder. There's many disorders that are connected to abuse in childhood, and antisocial, schizotypal, borderline, many. So, how does trauma and abuse affect a child as she grows up and then becomes a mother herself? And how does it affect her relationships with other people and with her partner or her spouse or her child? Same for little boys and their fathers. So let's look at these intergenerational cycles and how it can play out. And so the secure child becomes a supportive parent. But something interesting happens here with the avoidant child and the aggressive child. Remember, the avoidant child has this fear, and the aggressive child has excessive anger. And so there's a kind of a swapping here where the avoidant child becomes a permissive parent because they are soft and they avoid confrontation, and they are people pleasers kind of, and they want to please the child. And the aggressive child becomes an authoritarian parent. So they are used to ramping up and amplifying their anger and upset to get what they want, and so this becomes the relationship style, and this becomes how they interact with their child as they grow up. Now, the unstable child goes on to become an uninvolved or abusive parent, and but it depends. It's not always the case, but it often is the case. And you have to keep in mind that kids have two attachment styles with each parent, and so it's not necessarily that this will be the case. Okay, secure attachment has been linked in systematic research to almost every positive index of mental health and general well-being. Resilience in the face of stress, optimism, high self-esteem, confidence and curiosity, tolerance for human differences, a sense of belonging, the ability to self-disclose and be assertive, to tolerate ambiguity, to regulate difficult emotions. That's Susan M. Johnson in Attachment Theory in Practice. Patricia Romano-McGraw emphasizes empathic healing relationships, and one of my favorite books is It's Not Your Fault. Healing relationships change your brain and can help you overcome a painful past. And she talks a lot about attunement, and I love how she writes and explains it. So she says, repetitive, comforting, attuned relationship creates healthy, more or less permanent neural patterning. The glance of reassurance, the outstretched arms of welcome, the attuned attention of the mother or father tell the child that the world is a safe and predictable place and that we are welcome in it. Distracted, preoccupied, and unpredictably harsh or frightening behavior of the mother or father with unresolved trauma and loss tells the child that the world is an unsafe and frightening place. This uncertainty and lack of consistency create within the child a deep sense of insecurity and fear of the world. Your brain patterns itself in response to experiences. Relationships are powerful experiences, and so relationships change your brain.